Hello, strange, dark, and mysterious people. Today we ascend to an altitude where the air is thin, the silence is absolute, and the secrets are frozen in time. We're talking about a group of seasoned mountaineers, a remote peak in the Canadian Rockies, and a discovery that defies all logic and sanity. This is the story of something found where nothing should ever be. This is the story of the trapdoor found 10,000 feet up a mountain. Our story begins with four experienced climbers, Liam, Ben, Chloe, and David. They were attempting a technical ascent of Mount Ymir, a massive, often overlooked peak known for its brutal, unpredictable weather and sheer isolation. The mountain was not technically the highest in the region, but it was certainly the most dangerous, attracting only the most serious and somewhat obsessive climbers. The team was on their third day of the ascent. The weather had been surprisingly clear, giving them an unobstructed view of the vast wilderness below. They were navigating a particularly treacherous section of the mountain, a high ridge known as the Devil's Spine, which sat at an altitude of approximately 10,000 feet. This area was not rock, it was a desolate frozen plateau of packed ice and loose shale. Nothing grew here, nothing lived here, and absolutely nothing human should ever have been built here. It was Ben who saw it first. He stopped dead in his tracks, raising a gloved hand to signal the team to halt. He didn't point or shout, he simply stood there staring at the ground a few yards ahead of them. Liam, the team leader, slowly advanced and saw what had arrested Ben's attention. The plateau was a uniform gray and white of rock and ice. But embedded into this frozen expanse was a square, a perfect square of weathered dark iron. It lay absolutely flat against the shale and was only visible because the wind had scoured the snow away from its edges. It had a heavy iron ring handle resting flush against the surface. It was a trapdoor. A trapdoor 10,000 feet up a mountain, miles from the nearest trail, miles from the nearest cabin, miles from any recorded human activity. The initial reaction was confusion, followed quickly by a scientific curiosity. David, a geologist, immediately knelt down. He confirmed the surrounding rock was ancient granite and that the door was clearly an anomaly. It wasn't modern aluminum, it was heavy cast iron, showing signs of extreme cold and age. "It can't be a vent for a mine," David muttered, his voice barely carrying over the thin air. "There are no minerals up here worth mining, and it's too high for any kind of storage bunker." Chloe, the team historian, tried to rationalize it. Maybe an old weather station built during the Cold War? A bunker for equipment? But Liam shook his head. "Look at the rockwork around it," he instructed. "It's not patched, it's built right into the stone. Someone carved out this mountain face just to set this door here." It took the four of them working together over half an hour to chip the ice and frozen debris away from the door's edges. Finally, they pulled the heavy iron ring, and with a tremendous groaning sound, the trap door lifted a foot into the air. A rush of air immediately escaped. It wasn't stale air or musty air. It was a blast of intensely cold but surprisingly fresh air, almost sterile. The team immediately recoiled as a fog of condensation billowed out. Below the trapdoor was a set of crude, uneven stairs carved directly into the bedrock, leading down into total absolute blackness. Liam held a flashlight down the opening. The beam of light disappeared almost instantly after about 20 feet. It was a deep descent, perhaps 30 to 40 feet. They couldn't hear the bottom. The silence that had defined the mountain now seemed to pour out of the hole, a silence far more profound and terrifying than any normal quiet. Liam, the leader, was cautious. "We are not going down there," he stated firmly. "This is too far off the grid. It could be unstable, it could be anything." But curiosity, that strange, dark human impulse, was stronger than their training. Ben argued. "Liam, we just found something that history says shouldn't exist. We have to look." We go down one by one, secured to the safety line. It was a catastrophic lapse in judgment. Liam reluctantly agreed. He was the first to descend. He secured himself to the main safety rope and slowly backed into the opening, flashlight in hand. He reported everything he saw as he went. Steps are uneven but solid. Walls are just raw rock, feels man-made, not natural. Hold on. There's a landing at about 30 feet. Then Liam reached the bottom. His voice changed. It went from professional to profoundly disturbed. "It's a small chamber," he whispered. "Maybe 10 feet square. The air is freezing," and he trailed off. And what Liam Ben shouted down the hole, "What do you see?" There was a long, agonizing silence. Then Liam's voice returned a thin, strained sound. "It's a room, but the walls are covered in writing. Thousands of symbols. They don't look like any known language. They look like scratches. And there's a hole, a small hole in the back wall. It's about 5 feet high and 3 feet wide. It goes deeper." "Liam, come up," Chloe insisted, sensing the escalating terror. "We photograph it, then we get out." "No, wait." Liam's voice was barely a breath now. "The writing, it's all pointing to the hole. And there's a sound." "What sound?" David asked. "A hum," Liam said. "A very low hum. It's coming from the hole. It's getting louder." Suddenly, the safety rope went slack. Ben immediately shouted, "Liam." Liam responded, "What happened?" Nothing. Total silence from below. A new sound then emerged from the opening, a high-pitched, squealing metallic screech, followed by a heavy impact sound, like the sound of a bowling ball hitting a wooden floor. Ben immediately clipped a small metal camera onto the rope and lowered it down the entire length. He pulled the camera back up, his hands shaking so badly he could barely detach it. They immediately crowded around the tiny screen. The footage was short. It showed Liam's initial view of the small carved chamber. The walls were indeed covered in strange, jagged symbols. The camera panned to the small hole in the back wall, and then the camera tilted down rapidly, showing what had caused the rope to go slack. Liam's backpack. It was lying crumpled on the floor. His headlamp still illuminated the small space, but Liam himself was gone. The footage ended abruptly, but not before showing the final terrifying detail. The entrance to the small hole in the back wall was now surrounded by a thick, viscous black residue like hardened tar. It wasn't there in Liam's initial report. It looked like something had rushed out of the hole and then immediately sealed itself back in. The remaining 3 climbers were frozen in place 10,000 feet up a mountain, facing a hole that had swallowed their leader whole. They knew they couldn't stay. They had to descend and call for help. But the descent was a nightmare. They were haunted by the heavy metallic groaning of the trapdoor in the wind, the absolute knowledge that their friend was gone, and the strange dark residue that now covered the rope where it disappeared into the earth. When they finally made it to the ranger station, 2 days later, exhausted and mentally broken, the authorities were skeptical. A trapdoor 10,000 feet up a desolate mountain, a hole that sucked a man into the bedrock. They launched an expensive and extensive recovery mission, but they never found the location. The storm that followed their descent completely buried the Devil's Spine in feet of new snow and ice, making it impossible to locate the exact spot. But the horror did not end there. Chloe was the one who suffered the worst. She couldn't sleep. She would wake up screaming, complaining of a constant high-pitched humming sound in her ears. She said the hum was a language, and she was afraid she was beginning to understand it. Her apartment eventually became littered with drawings. She would take a pen and scratch out the same jagged, nonsensical symbols she had seen on the walls of that small underground chamber. Her husband found her one morning, sitting in the kitchen, carving the symbols into the smooth wooden surface of their kitchen table using the sharp end of a fork. She was completely catatonic. The symbols they discovered were identical to the ones on the camera footage, a language of absolute fear. David, the geologist, tried to find a rational explanation. He theorized that the chamber was an ancient air pocket, perhaps filled with toxic gas that caused an extreme psychotic episode, and that Liam had simply wandered off a cliff edge and the rope snapped on a sharp rock. But that didn't explain the sealed hole or the black residue. And the fate of that final member, Ben, is perhaps the strangest detail of all. 1 year after the incident, Ben disappeared. He didn't wander off the grid or get lost in the mountains. He simply vanished from his own home. He was a meticulous man, a creature of habit. The police found his door locked, his keys and wallet on the kitchen counter, and his car parked neatly in the driveway. Everything was in order except for one terrifying detail. In the center of his living room floor, Ben had carefully arranged a small pile of mountain shale and loose rock. And on top of that small pile, he had placed a single heavy piece of dark weathered iron. It was a small replica of a trapdoor. He had built it himself, and he was gone. It seems that whatever entity or mechanism was sealed inside that cold, dark hole 10,000 feet up, Mount Ymir found a way to reach out and reclaim those who disturbed its ancient, terrible silence. It was a guest who waited in the cold dark, and when it was finally visited, it simply decided to extend the invitation permanently. The trapdoor was not a way to keep things out. It was a lock to keep things in, and once opened, it decided that the time for silence was over. So what do you think was sealed inside that mountain? An ancient secret society, a geological anomaly, or something far older and more alien than human history can account for? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and tell me where in the world are you watching this story from. Thank you for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.
This story is about a simple piece of jewelry, an engagement ring. It was meant to symbolize love and promise, but after a horrible tragedy, it became something else entirely. A conduit, a connection, a terrifying link between the living and the dead. Our main character wore the ring out of love for her sister, but by doing so, she opened a door to a place none of us want to visit. This is the story of ***. She wore her dead sister's ring, and then the calls started. ***. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where these stories are heard. Now we head to Charleston, South Carolina. The year is 2012. We meet our main character, a 25-year-old woman named Clara Jensen. Clara had an older sister, Diana, who was 2 years her senior. They were incredibly close best friends, inseparable, sharing secrets and dreams. Diana was engaged to a wonderful man named Ethan. Their wedding was scheduled for the following summer. Diana's engagement ring was a very old, distinctive heirloom, a rose gold band with a large antique emerald at the center, set in a unique, almost Gothic pattern. It was a beautiful ring, but it had a weighty, almost cold feeling to it, even in the warmest room. Then, tragedy struck. It was a cold, foggy Tuesday morning in the month of February. Diana was driving to her office downtown when a distracted truck driver, traveling at maybe 70 miles per hour, crossed the median. The accident was catastrophic and instantaneous. Diana passed away at the scene. The entire family was destroyed by grief. Ethan, Diana's fiancé, was completely broken. After the funeral, he gave the engagement ring to Clara's parents. He said he couldn't bear to look at it, but he knew Diana would want someone she loved to have it. Clara's mother gave the ring to Clara. Clara initially kept it in a small velvet box in her dresser, unable to look at it. It was too painful, too real. But as the weeks passed, Clara began to feel a profound sense of loss and a desperate yearning for connection. She missed her sister so much it was a physical ache. One rainy evening, maybe 3 months after the accident, Clara opened the box. She took out the rose gold ring and slipped it onto the ring finger of her left hand. It fit perfectly. It felt cold, but heavy and comforting. "I'll keep you close," Clara whispered, looking at the large green emerald. The calls started the very next day. Clara was at work, sitting at her cubicle, when her cell phone vibrated. It was an unknown number. She looked at the screen, saw the call was coming from an out-of-state area code, and ignored it. She figured it was a solicitor. The phone rang again 5 minutes later. Same number. She ignored it again. Over the next few days, the calls became relentless. They only ever happened when she was alone. They would come 5 or 6 times a day. If she was with a coworker, the phone would stay silent. If she walked into the break room alone, it would immediately start ringing. She was tired of the disruption, so one afternoon, out of sheer annoyance, she finally answered it. "Hello?" Clara said, sounding frustrated. There was complete silence on the other end of the line. No static, no breathing, No background noise, just a dead, deep, empty silence. Hello? Who is this? Stop calling my number, Clara demanded. After maybe 5 seconds of the deep silence, she heard a sound. It wasn't a word. It wasn't a breath. It was a low, mechanical asterisk, asterisk, click, asterisk, asterisk. And then the line went dead. The call was over. Clara blocked the number. The next day, her phone started ringing again. The number was different, but the area code was the same. She blocked that one too. This continued for nearly 2 weeks. She would block a number, and a new one would immediately pop up the next day, always the same strange area code. She was starting to feel unnerved. This wasn't a solicitor. This felt targeted. One night, the phone rang late, around 1 o'clock in the morning. Clara was half asleep. She picked it up immediately, without looking at the screen. "Stop calling me," she mumbled. The familiar, deep silence was there. But this time, it was different. This time, the silence felt heavy, like it was pressing against her eardrum. And then she heard the sound. Not the click this time. This time, it was a faint, almost inaudible asterisk, asterisk chuckle. Asterisk, asterisk. It was a dry, quick, singular sound, like air escaping a sealed chamber. And it sounded familiar, horrifyingly familiar. It sounded exactly like her sister Diana's laugh. Clara's heart seized in her chest. She dropped the phone, she picked it up again, trembling, and shouted, "Diana, is that you?" The chuckle was gone. Only the deep silence remained. Then the single, mechanical, asterisk, asterisk, click, asterisk, asterisk. The line went dead. Clara couldn't sleep the rest of the night. She started checking the phone records. She wrote down every number, every call time, and every single time she wore the emerald ring. The calls asterisk, asterisk, only asterisk, asterisk came when the ring was on her finger. If she took it off for an hour and put it in the box, the calls stopped immediately. She thought about taking the ring off forever, but the yearning for her sister was too strong. She had to know if it was really Diana. She decided she would wear the ring and times answer times the next time it rang, but she would keep her mouth shut. She would listen. The phone rang the next afternoon. Clara was sitting alone in her apartment. She slowly picked up the phone. The deep silence. Clara said nothing. She waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Then she heard the sound again. The faint, dry asterisk, asterisk chuckle, asterisk, asterisk. And then, slowly, a sound like paper being crumpled. And a voice, not a cheerful voice, but a voice distorted by something terrible, something that sounded like it was speaking through water. The voice was thin, reedy, and unmistakably female. It whispered a single sentence. Asterisk, asterisk, the light is gone. Asterisk, asterisk. Clara froze, tears welling up. That was Diana's voice. That was her sister's voice, but warped by agony. Clara managed to stammer, "Diana, what light? Where are you?" The voice whispered again, closer now, a terrible sound of effort. Asterisk, asterisk. The car, the fog. I need to find the asterisk, asterisk, and then the horrible, mechanical, asterisk, asterisk, click, asterisk, asterisk. The line went dead. Clara was convinced this was a supernatural connection, and her sister was trapped somewhere. She went to Ethan, Diana's former fiancé, and told him everything. She showed him the logs, the phone numbers, and played him the recording she'd made of the last call. Ethan, a pragmatic engineer, dismissed it as grief and an elaborate prank. But when Clara handed him the phone and showed him the numbers, he recognized one of the area codes. It was the area code for the asterisk asterisk State Highway Patrol Barracks asterisk asterisk located closest to the accident site. Clara realized that every phone call she received was not coming from a random line, but from the official recorded lines of local government offices and emergency services. The calls were being somehow times rerouted times or times hijacked times through the very infrastructure that was present at the scene of Diana's death. Clara and Ethan started tracking the calls more seriously. They realized that when the calls came, the real number was displaying a time-stamped log from a police scanner or a recorded fire department call numbers that were active on the day Diana died. They focused on the last call. The car, the fog. Clara and Ethan went to the accident scene, the median strip, on Highway 78. The ground had healed over, but the cold fog of the morning felt present. Clara took off the ring and held it in her hand. "Diana, if you're here, I need to know what you need." Nothing happened. Clara took a deep breath, slipped the ring back onto her finger, and pulled out her phone. It was silent. She repeated the words Diana had whispered. "The light is gone." Immediately, her phone began to vibrate violently in her hand. The screen flashed the familiar unknown number. She put the phone to her ear. The deep, heavy silence. Then, a frantic, choked whisper. Asterisk, asterisk. The light. The light in the glove box. Find the key. It's gone. I need it. Asterisk, asterisk. And the asterisk, asterisk click. Asterisk, asterisk. Clara immediately opened her own car's glove box. She stared at it. What key? What is she talking about? Ethan, standing beside her, suddenly remembered something. He looked panicked. "The safety deposit box," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. "The one with the deed to her condo. We couldn't find the key anywhere after the funeral. We assumed she lost it." Clara and Ethan drove to Diana's old car, which had been stored in an impound lot for months. They had already searched it 3 times. Clara, wearing the ring, went directly to the glove box. She reached deep into the compartment and felt a small, hard shape lodged far in the back corner. She pulled it out. It was a safety deposit box key. It must have been thrown there by the force of the impact. It was the only light Diana had in those final moments. The little light that illuminates the glove box when you open it. Clara finally had the thing Diana was so desperately trying to communicate. Clara held the key, the symbol of finality, and slipped the rose gold ring off her finger. She placed the ring and the key side by side in the velvet box. She closed the lid. Clara never put the ring on again. She found a buyer for the emerald, had the setting melted down, and donated the money to a local charity in Diana's name. The phone calls stopped completely. The unknown numbers vanished from her phone log. The silence returned to normal. But years later, Clara admits that sometimes, when her phone rings late at night and it's an unknown number, she hesitates. Because she can never quite shake the memory of that strange, warped voice and the sound of her sister's dry, quick, mechanical asterisk, asterisk, chuckle, asterisk, asterisk, all brought to her by a single piece of antique jewelry. And that, my friends, is why some people say you should never wear the relics of the dead. It is a story that is truly asterisk, asterisk, strange, dark, and mysterious. Asterisk, asterisk. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, I'll stay safe out there. This story is about the thin, terrifying line between what we imagine in our sleep and what actually exists in the physical world. We have all had those nightmares where we wake up gasping, heart racing, only to realize with a wave of relief that it was just a dream. But for one woman in a quiet suburb, that relief never came. Instead, she opened her eyes to find that the horror she thought she had escaped was standing right at the foot of her bed, waiting for her to join the waking world. This is the story of the nightmare that became reality when she woke up. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. It is always fascinating to see where these stories are heard. Now, we head to a peaceful neighborhood in Savannah, Georgia. The year is 2022. Our main character is 31-year-old Maya Vance. Maya was a successful interior designer who had just moved into a beautiful, historic townhouse that she had spent 6 months renovating. She was independent, logical, and not the type of person who easily got spooked. The house was her masterpiece, filled with high-end furniture and a state-of-the-art security system. On the night of October 14th, 2022, Maya went to bed around 11 o'clock at night. It had been a long day of moving heavy boxes, and she fell into a deep, heavy sleep almost immediately. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, the dream began. In the dream, Maya was standing in the middle of her new living room. Everything looked exactly as it did in real life, except for one thing: the lighting. The room was bathed in a sickly, pulsating yellow glow. She felt a heavy, crushing sense of dread. In the dream, she heard a sound coming from the kitchen, a slow, rhythmic scraping noise, like a metal blade being dragged across stone. Maya walked toward the kitchen, her heart pounding against her ribs. When she reached the doorway, she saw a figure. It was a tall, unnaturally thin man with skin the color of wet parchment. He was hunched over her kitchen island, and he was holding a long, rusted carving knife. He was slowly, methodically carving deep, jagged lines into the marble countertop. The man stopped and slowly turned his head. He had no eyes, just deep, hollow pits filled with a thick, black fluid. He opened his mouth to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth and whispered one word: "Found." Maya screamed in the dream and bolted toward the stairs. She could hear the wet, slapping sound of his bare feet hitting the hardwood floor right behind her. She reached her bedroom, slammed the door, and locked it. She threw herself onto her bed and pulled the covers over her head, praying to wake up. And then she did. Maya snapped awake. Her heart was racing, and she was drenched in a cold sweat. She took a deep breath, clutching her chest. She looked around her bedroom. The moonlight was filtering through the curtains, casting soft blue shadows. It was quiet. The yellow glow was gone. The scraping sound was gone. She was safe. She checked her phone on the nightstand. It was 2:22 in the morning. She told herself it was just the stress of the move. She got out of bed to get a glass of water, laughing at how vivid the nightmare had been. She walked to her bedroom door and reached for the handle. She stopped. The door was already unlocked. Maya clearly remembered locking it before she went to sleep. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. She slowly opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The house was silent. She walked down the stairs, her bare feet making almost no noise on the wood. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she looked toward the kitchen. The lights were off. She walked into the kitchen and turned on the overhead light. She looked at the marble island. Her breath hitched in her throat. There, in the center of the pristine white marble, were three deep, jagged lines carved into the stone. They were fresh. There was white marble dust still sitting on the edges of the cuts. Maya felt like the floor was falling out from under her. This was exactly what the man had been doing in her dream. She looked toward the back door. It was locked from the inside. She checked her security app on her phone. No sensors had been triggered. No cameras had captured any movement. She was alone in the house. She told herself she must have done it in her sleep. Maybe she was sleepwalking due to the stress. She went back upstairs, locked her bedroom door again, and sat on the edge of the bed, too terrified to close her eyes. About 20 minutes passed. The silence of the house was absolute. And then, Maya heard it, coming from right outside her bedroom door. The slow, rhythmic scraping noise. It was moving closer. Maya grabbed her phone and dialed 911. But as the line started to ring, her phone screen suddenly flickered and turned bright, pulsating yellow. The call disconnected. The scraping noise stopped right outside her door. Maya stared at the bottom of the door, where a sliver of light from the hallway usually showed. That sliver of light was now blocked by two dark, thin shadows. Someone was standing right there, and then the doorknob began to turn. Slowly, methodically. Maya watched in horror as the lock she had just engaged clicked open by itself. The door creaked open just a few inches. A thick, black fluid began to ooze from the hinges, dripping onto the floor with a wet, slapping sound. Maya scrambled to the corner of her bed, screaming for help. The door swung wide. Standing in the doorway was the man from her dream, the parchment skin, the hollow pits for eyes, the rusted knife. He stepped into the room, and as he did, the blue moonlight vanished, replaced by that sickly yellow glow. He leaned forward, the black fluid leaking from his eye sockets, and he whispered the same word: "Found." Maya threw her lamp at him, but it passed through his body as if he were made of smoke. He lunged at her, the rusted knife raised high. Maya squeezed her eyes shut and felt a sharp, searing pain in her shoulder. She screamed one last time, and then total darkness. Maya woke up again. She was back in her bed. The sun was shining through the windows. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. She was gasping for air. She immediately reached for her shoulder. There was no pain. There was no blood. Her nightshirt was dry. She looked at her bedroom door. It was locked. She felt a massive wave of relief. It had been a false awakening, a dream within a dream. She got out of bed, feeling a bit shaky but immensely grateful. She went downstairs to the kitchen, determined to put the whole ordeal behind her. She walked to the marble island to start the coffee. She stopped. The 3 jagged lines were there. They were carved deep into the marble. Maya backed away, her hands shaking. She looked at her phone. The screen was normal, but when she checked her call logs, there was a call to 911 at 2:22 that lasted 0 seconds. She ran to the front door, wanting to get out of the house. As she reached for the deadbolt, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. She stopped. She slowly pulled the collar of her nightshirt down, exposing her right shoulder. There, etched into her skin in dark, bruised lines, was the word found. The nightmare hadn't ended when she woke up. The nightmare had simply waited for her to be fully conscious so she could experience the terror of knowing it was real. Maya Vance moved out of that house that same day. She never went back, not even for her furniture. She tells people she moved because of the commute, but the truth is, she is terrified of falling asleep in any room with a marble counter, because she knows that somewhere that man is still carving, and he knows exactly where she is. And that, my friends, is why this story of a dream that crossed the border into reality is truly strange, dark, and mysterious. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, stay safe out there.
Hello, strange, dark, and mysterious people. Today we travel to the vast, unforgiving silence of the North Atlantic Ocean, to a place where technology failed and a desperate experiment went horrifically wrong. This is the story of a deep-sea research team who encountered a vast sound, a sound that defied physics and sanity, a sound that made their world collapse inward. This is the story of the deepest sound that wasn't supposed to be there. Our story centers on the crew of the acoustic research vessel Siren, a highly specialized scientific ship. Their mission was to deploy a newly developed hydrophone array in the Challenger Deep area of the North Atlantic, the deepest known point of that ocean basin, far below the deepest submarine operating depths. The core team consisted of 3 brilliant but obsessive scientists. Dr. Lena Hansen, the lead acoustician, who had dedicated her life to analyzing ocean sounds, Marcus Mac Allen, the systems engineer and submersible pilot, and Dr. Kenji Tanaka, the deep-sea geophysicist. The day their story truly began was their 25th day at sea. They were operating in a desolate area, miles from any shipping lanes, and the surface weather was calm, a deceptive tranquility over a terrifying abyss. Their special specialized hydrophone array, which was a string of sensitive microphones designed to withstand crushing pressure, was lowered down through the water column. The instruments descended past the mesopelagic zone, past the bathopelagic zone, and into the crushing eternal blackness of the abyssopelagic zone, a depth of over 15,000 feet. Lena was in the control room monitoring the audio feed. Normally, the deep ocean is filled with the low-frequency rumble of whale songs, the clicks of sperm whales, and the distant hiss of seismic activity. Today, the feed was mostly dominated by the mechanical sounds of the ship's winches and the occasional pop of deep-sea crustaceans. Then the sound started. It wasn't a crack or a screech or a whale song. It was a single, incredibly vast pulse of energy. It was so low frequency, so powerful that it didn't just register on the audio equipment, it made the metal deck beneath their feet vibrate. The ship's structural alarm immediately flashed red. What was that? Mac yelled, scrambling to check the hull integrity monitors. Seismic activity, Kenji. Kenji shook his head, his eyes glued to the seismic data readout. Negative. No ground shift. It was purely acoustic, but it was off the charts. The pressure wave was massive. Lena was frozen, staring at her spectrogram monitor. The sound signature was perfectly unique. It occupied a frequency band far below anything natural. It was an impossible sound. She later labeled it the hum. The hum was a continuous tone, a low resonating frequency that felt less like something heard and more like something physically experienced inside the chest. The deep-sea hydrophones were now completely overwhelmed by it. The sensor array is getting hammered, Mac reported. The signal strength is off the scales. It's coming from below us, way below. The sound source is at least 2,000 feet deeper than our deepest sensor. This was the first impossible piece of the puzzle. The deepest sensor was at 15,000 feet. If the source was 2,000 feet below that, it meant the sound was originating from a depth of 17,000 feet, a realm of crushing darkness so immense that very few things could survive there, and absolutely nothing mechanical could be operating. They spent the next 48 hours trying to rationalize it. They theorized deep-sea magma vents, rogue military sonar experiments, even undiscovered colossal whale species. But none of the theories matched the physics. The sound was too perfectly uniform, too mathematically clean. The sound started to affect the crew. The hum, a continuous low thrumming sound, began to cause nausea and severe headaches. But worse than the physical symptoms were the psychological ones. The crew began to feel profound disorientation. They found themselves unable to concentrate, their memories became cloudy, and they experienced periods of almost dreamlike detachment. One evening, Lena was reviewing the raw audio data when she noticed something terrifying. The hum wasn't uniform. It had a rhythm. It would repeat a short, complex pattern every 6.2 seconds, a pattern that sounded like a colossal engine item. She focused all her processing power on isolating the rhythmic components. As the computer filtered out the background noise, the rhythmic thrumming sound suddenly resolved into something far more chilling. It was language. The pattern was not a random sequence of thumps, it was conveying information. The sheer size and depth of the sound source meant that the rhythm had been designed to be broadcast over vast distances, possibly across entire ocean basins. Lena and Kenji worked for another day and a night, fueled by terrible curiosity, trying to decode the language. They realized the rhythm was based on a simple numerical sequence, a binary code that was translated by the unique pressure dynamics of the deep water. The message they decoded was short and profoundly disturbing. It repeated over and over with the 6.2 second rhythm. The water is too loud. We are waiting for the silence. The seal is broken. At the exact moment they decoded this phrase, the submersible pilot Mac burst into the control room drenched in sweat eyes, wild. He was holding a large wrench in his hand. "Mac, what's wrong?" Lena demanded. "The water," Mac whispered, looking around the control room as if expecting the walls to dissolve. "I can't hear the water anymore. It's too loud in my head. I have to make it stop." He wasn't talking about the ship's noise or the hum. He was talking about a sound that was only in his mind. The profound pressure wave of the hum had somehow rearranged his auditory perception. Mac lunged for the main communication array, yelling, "I have to send a signal! I have to tell them the seal is broken!" Kenji tackled him, and they wrestled the wrench away, but the fear was palpable. The sound was driving them insane. Lena immediately ordered the hydrophone array to be cut loose. "We are pulling out Kenji. We are leaving this site right now." Kenji nodded frantically and went to the winch controls, but as he looked at the instruments, his face went pale. "Lena, the cable is moving," he stammered. "I haven't engaged the winch. It's paying out cable." "Something is pulling the array down." They looked at the winch. The heavy steel spool was slowly turning, unwinding the thick armored cable against the locked brakes. The enormous tension on the line was making the entire ship groan. Something massive was tugging the entire cable and the attached hydrophones deeper into the abyss. They cut the cable. It snapped with a sound like a rifle, shot the remainder whipping across the deck. They had lost the entire 15,000 feet of equipment. The loss of the array immediately silenced the hum in the control room. The physical vibration stopped. The sound was gone. A sudden, terrifying silence enveloped the ship, but the silence only lasted for a minute. The ship's emergency sonar suddenly activated. It was a new sound, this one far closer and more complex than the hum. It was a rhythmic scratching sound coming from directly beneath the hull. It sounded like massive fingernails dragging slowly across the steel plating. "That's not acoustic," Mac, now calm but terrifyingly detached, said. "That's contact. Something is on the hull." It followed the cable up. Lena rushed to the emergency thermal scanner, a device designed to detect anomalies in the cold, deep water. The scanner showed nothing. The water beneath the ship was an icy uniform, 4 degrees Celsius, but Kenji was looking at the ship's internal structural integrity monitor. He pointed to the data stream, his hand shaking. "The hull. It's contracting," he whispered. "It's not being crushed. It's being slowly squeezed." The pressure sensors on the outside of the hull were reading an external pressure far beyond the water pressure, a massive biomechanical pressure being exerted on the ship's keel. Then came the final terrifying communication. The ship's internal intercom system, the one connecting the control room to the engine room and the galley, suddenly crackled with static. A single human voice came over the intercom. It was Mac's voice. "The water is too loud," the voice said, perfectly flat and devoid of emotion. "We are waiting for the silence. The seal is broken. We are ready for the transfer." Mac was still standing in the control room between Lena and Kenji. He hadn't touched the intercom switch. He was staring at the deck, his eyes wide. They backed away from him in horror. The voice on the intercom repeated the phrase, and then simply dissolved into the low, continuous sound of the hum. Mac's body suddenly spasmed. He dropped to his knees and began to convulse violently. His mouth opened in a silent scream, and thick black bile began to stream from his lips, soaking the floor. Kenji and Lena watched in absolute terror as Mac's body contorted, and then with a final sickening lurch, his eyes rolled back. He stopped moving. He was dead. But what they saw next shattered their sanity. The black bile that covered the floor began to move. It didn't pool or spread. It started to crawl in a precise, perfect line toward the main computer terminal. As it moved, it solidified, turning into a material that looked exactly like the black fibrous covering of the discarded winch cable. The substance reached the computer and rapidly coated the console, covering the keyboard and the screen. It was not a fungal growth or a physical process. It was a rapid, silent transfer of consciousness or information. Lena and Kenji immediately abandoned the control room. They climbed through the emergency escape hatch and into the open air of the deck. They launched the single emergency life raft and paddled furiously away from the siren. As they drifted away, they looked back at their research vessel. The ship was silent, completely dark, but they could see the black fibrous substance dripping from the windows of the control room, spreading across the steel hull. And then they heard it one final time. The hum. It was no longer coming from the deep, it was coming from the ship. The siren, their ship, the vessel that had carried them on their mission, was now broadcasting the impossible sound, a single vast tone emanating from the deck itself. It was the sound of something ancient that had finally found a way to the surface. The seal was indeed broken. Lena and Kenji were rescued 2 days later by a passing fishing trawler. They told a fragmented, unbelievable story of a sound, a cryptic message, and a ship that devoured their friend. The trawler crew reported seeing the siren, a large black ship, drifting silently on the waves, completely intact, but they refused to board it, citing an unnerving silence. When the Coast Guard finally reached the coordinates, the siren was gone. No wreckage, no debris, no oil slick, just a vast, empty expanse of water where the ship should have been. The terrifying truth they carried back with them was that the deep ocean did not just contain life, it contained intelligence. An ancient consciousness that communicated using a sound so powerful it could break the human mind, and a method of transmission that used human bodies and technology to spread its signal to the surface world. Mac's message, "We are ready for the transfer," was not a warning. It was the final signal of a successful infection. So what was the sound, and what intelligence was waiting for the silence to break? Did the siren become the first of the new vessels for this ancient deep-sea intelligence? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and tell me where in the world are you watching this story from. Thank you for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.
Hello, strange, dark, and mysterious people. Today we leave the deserts and the deep oceans and venture into the quiet, unsuspecting suburbs, a place where the veil between worlds is often the thinnest. This is a terrifying tale of a house built on impossible geography of a new homeowner who discovered that his house was not a single dwelling, but a terrifying, shifting cluster of different times and realities, all accessible through a single innocuous door. This is the story of the house that was only 1 foot wide. Our main character is Thomas Vance, a 30-something software developer from the city who desperately wanted to escape the noise and chaos of urban life. He purchased an older, detached house in a quiet suburban cul-de-sac, a house that had been on the market for an inexplicably long time, despite its low price and desirable location. The house was a typical 2-story colonial structure with white siding and a small, overgrown yard. It had one unsettling physical anomaly. The north exterior wall was built directly on the lot line, and according to the legal survey Thomas received, the wall itself measured exactly 1 foot wide. It was an impossible architectural feature, but Thomas dismissed it as an ancient surveying error or a strange local building code adjustment. The rest of the house seemed normal. Thomas moved in during the late autumn. The first few weeks were peaceful, filled with the sounds of unpacking and the satisfying quiet of suburban life. The strange events began in the basement. The basement was an old concrete space with a low ceiling and a persistent cold dampness. Thomas was trying to set up a new home theater system when he noticed a small wooden door built into the foundation wall near the chimney stack. The door was incredibly narrow, barely wider than a boot, and had a small, rusted iron latch. It seemed completely useless and purely decorative. He tried the latch. It clicked open easily. Thomas pulled the door open. He expected to see a crawl space or a concrete pocket. Instead, he saw a hallway. It wasn't a dark, dusty passage. It was a brightly lit, perfectly clean corridor lined with light oak paneling. The corridor was unnervingly narrow, exactly 1 foot wide, and stretched into the distance until it was lost in a haze of bright, artificial light. The air pouring out of the opening was dry and carried the faint, synthetic scent of new carpet and industrial cleaner. It was the corridor of an extremely modern, perfectly maintained office building. Thomas was stunned. This corridor was inside his house's foundation wall, a wall that was less than a foot thick. The sheer impossibility of the space violated every law of physics and architecture he knew. He was a rational man. He took photos, sealed the door, and immediately called his contractor, Mr. Henderson, a seasoned local builder. Henderson arrived the next day. He inspected the narrow door, the impossibly clean hallway, and the 1 foot thick foundation wall. Henderson scratched his head, ran his hands over the concrete, and after 30 minutes of speechless confusion, he finally said, "Mr. Vance, I've been building houses in this town for 40 years. That is not a closet, and it is not on any blueprint. That door is simply not supposed to be there." Henderson refused to touch it and left Thomas with a profound and terrifying problem. Thomas spent the rest of the week researching the history of the house. The previous owners had all moved out abruptly, citing unforeseen life changes. One particularly disturbing anecdote was from the 1950s, when a woman claimed her husband had walked through the wrong door and was permanently assigned to a new location. Driven by a mix of fear and professional curiosity, Thomas decided he had to explore. He purchased a military-grade headlamp, a body harness with a thick rope, and a professional-grade handheld GPS unit. He fastened the rope securely to a basement support beam and slowly, cautiously squeezed himself sideways through the narrow opening and into the 1 foot wide hallway. The moment he was fully inside, the air immediately chilled and the scent of ozone was overwhelming. He checked his GPS. It showed his current position as being in a wide open field 300 miles north of his actual location. The hallway existed in a different geographical space altogether. He walked for what felt like 2 minutes. The hallway was perfectly featureless. He was walking inside a paradox. Then he reached a new door. This door was a modern industrial steel hatch with a small electronic keypad. It was identical to the security doors found in high-tech corporate research labs. He tried the handle. Locked. He continued walking. The hallway abruptly changed, the oak paneling dissolved, and the walls were now lined with rough-hewn, damp stone. The air grew heavy and smelled of salt and decaying kelp. His GPS immediately shifted. He was now at an altitude of -50 feet, somewhere beneath the North Atlantic Ocean. The hallway had changed realities. He reached a second door. This one was a heavy, rusted bronze portal shaped like a diving bell hatch. It was covered in barnacles and locked tightly from the outside. Thomas knew he could not go further. He was deep within a structure that violated time, space, and reality, a structure built into a 1-foot space that only existed on his property. He started to retreat back to his basement, his heart pounding in his chest. As he passed the steel hatch of the office building, he paused and pressed his ear against the cold metal. He could hear a sound from within. The muffled, rhythmic clicking of computer keyboards and the low drone of human chatter. It sounded like an ordinary workday in a massive, modern office complex. As he listened, the narrow corridor began to vibrate. The stone walls of the deep-sea section began to emit a faint, sickly green glow, and the metallic smell of the office section intensified. The impossible space was destabilizing. Thomas scrambled back toward his exit. He was 10 feet from the wooden door when he heard something that stopped him cold. It was a sound coming from behind the steel office hatch, a new sound, not the clicking of keyboards, but a sharp, rhythmic, metallic knock. It sounded exactly like someone was tapping a heavy wrench on the inside of the steel door. The rhythmic tapping resolved itself into a pattern. Tap, 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 tap. It was Morse code. Thomas, who had briefly served in the Navy, understood the code immediately. The message being tapped out was a single, repeated word: help, help, help. He froze. There was someone trapped inside the modern office building, an office building that was inexplicably located inside the foundation of his century-old suburban house. He was about to shout back when the tapping suddenly stopped. It was replaced by a continuous, low-frequency hum, a sound that vibrated through the floor and into his bone. It was the same overwhelming, consciousness-shattering sound reported by the deep-sea crew in the previous story. Then the voice came. It was a male voice, muffled and distorted, but clearly audible through the thin steel of the hatch. "Do not help the man, Thomas Vance," the voice warned. It spoke with a synthesized, perfectly calm tone, a tone that suggested it was being generated by a computer. "The 1-foot passage is not for entry, it is for storage. You must close the aperture and maintain the perimeter." Thomas backed away, scrambling toward the exit. "Who are you?" he screamed, his voice cracking with terror. The synthesized voice responded instantly, its tone chillingly professional. "We are the Suburban Maintenance Authority. Your domicile is operating outside its acceptable dimensional envelope. The 1-foot section is now scheduled for compression. Failure to evacuate will result in times permanent structural integration **. The moment the voice finished, the 1-foot-wide hallway began to rapidly shrink. The walls of the corridor began to close inward, not slowly, but with a horrifying, smooth, mechanical speed. The distance between the stone and the oak paneling was rapidly decreasing, threatening to crush Thomas sideways. He squeezed his body flat against the wall, his chest agonizingly compressed. He threw himself through the final 10 feet, pulling himself out of the narrow wooden door and tumbling onto the concrete floor of his basement just as the oak paneling slammed together with a sound like two giant tectonic plates colliding. He slammed the narrow wooden door shut and threw the rusted iron latch. The latch, which had been simple, now snapped closed with a satisfying heavy clunk that felt entirely too modern and powerful for the old iron. He spent the next 2 hours huddled upstairs, listening to the silence of his house. The only sound was his own ragged breathing. The next morning, Thomas went back down to the basement. The narrow wooden door was gone. The foundation wall was once again a smooth, uninterrupted surface of concrete. There was no sign of a latch, a hinge, or even a seam. The 1-foot wide corridor had been completely physically erased. Thomas knew the truth. His house was a nexus point, a single point of structural stability in a suburb built on shifting realities. The 1-foot wall was the edge of his own reality, and the narrow passage was a temporary storage unit for forgotten places and lost people, all managed by the terrifyingly bureaucratic Suburban Maintenance Authority. He sold the house a month later at a steep loss, citing unforeseen structural issues. He never told the realtor or the new owners about the door. He moved to a large city apartment, seeking the loud, comforting noise of people and traffic. The chaos was safe. But 3 months after he moved, he was walking down a perfectly ordinary city street. He stopped suddenly and looked down an alleyway between 2 tall buildings. The alley was perfectly straight, incredibly narrow, exactly 1 foot wide. It stretched into the distance, lined with perfectly featureless white ceramic tiles. And at the far end of the alley, partially obscured by the haze, was a single, tiny, narrow wooden door with a rusted iron latch. Thomas knew the 1-foot wide space hadn't been destroyed, it had simply transferred. The Suburban Maintenance Authority had followed him. He stood frozen, staring at the door, when his cell phone in his pocket began to vibrate with a low, continuous hum. The vibration was so strong, it felt like it was coming from inside his chest. He didn't check the phone. He knew the source of the hum. He knew the message that was waiting for him. The terror is that Thomas is still living in the house. He is living on the perimeter of the house, trapped forever in the geography of the 1-foot space, waiting for the Suburban Maintenance Authority to schedule his next visit. The question is, which door will he enter next? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and tell me, where in the world are you watching this story from? Thank you for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the next one.
This story is about the thin, terrifying line between what we imagine in our sleep and what actually exists in the physical world. We have all had those nightmares where we wake up gasping, heart racing, only to realize with a wave of relief that it was just a dream. But for one woman in a quiet suburb, that relief never came. Instead, she opened her eyes to find that the horror she thought she had escaped was standing right at the foot of her bed, waiting for her to join the waking world. This is the story of the nightmare that became reality when she woke up. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. It is always fascinating to see where these stories are heard. Now, we head to a peaceful neighborhood in Savannah, Georgia. The year is 2022. Our main character is 31-year-old Maya Vance. Maya was a successful interior designer who had just moved into a beautiful, historic townhouse that she had spent 6 months renovating. She was independent, logical, and not the type of person who easily got spooked. The house was her masterpiece, filled with high-end furniture and a state-of-the-art security system. On the night of October 14th, 2022, Maya went to bed around 11 o'clock at night. It had been a long day of moving heavy boxes, and she fell into a deep, heavy sleep almost immediately. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, the dream began. In the dream, Maya was standing in the middle of her new living room. Everything looked exactly as it did in real life, except for one thing: the lighting. The room was bathed in a sickly, pulsating yellow glow. She felt a heavy, crushing sense of dread. In the dream, she heard a sound coming from the kitchen, a slow, rhythmic scraping noise, like a metal blade being dragged across stone. Maya walked toward the kitchen, her heart pounding against her ribs. When she reached the doorway, she saw a figure. It was a tall, unnaturally thin man with skin the color of wet parchment. He was hunched over her kitchen island, and he was holding a long, rusted carving knife. He was slowly, methodically carving deep, jagged lines into the marble countertop. The man stopped and slowly turned his head. He had no eyes, just deep, hollow pits filled with a thick, black fluid. He opened his mouth to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth, and whispered one word: found. Maya screamed in the dream and bolted toward the stairs. She could hear the wet, slapping sound of his bare feet hitting the hardwood floor right behind her. She reached her bedroom, slammed the door, and locked it. She threw herself onto her bed and pulled the covers over her head, praying to wake up. And then she did. Maya snapped awake. Her heart was racing, and she was drenched in a cold sweat. She took a deep breath, clutching her chest. She looked around her bedroom. The moonlight was filtering through the curtains, casting soft blue shadows. It was quiet. The yellow glow was gone. The scraping sound was gone. She was safe. She checked her phone on the nightstand. It was 2:22 in the morning. She told herself it was just the stress of the move. She got out of bed to get a glass of water, laughing at how vivid the nightmare had been. She walked to her bedroom door and reached for the handle. She stopped. The door was already unlocked. Maya clearly remembered locking it before she went to sleep. She felt a chill crawl up her spine. She slowly opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The house was silent. She walked down the stairs, her bare feet making almost no noise on the wood. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she looked toward the kitchen. The lights were off. She walked into the kitchen and turned on the overhead light. She looked at the marble island. Her breath hitched in her throat. There, in the center of the pristine white marble, were three deep, jagged lines carved into the stone. They were fresh. There was white marble dust still sitting on the edges of the cuts. Maya felt like the floor was falling out from under her. This was exactly what the man had been doing in her dream. She looked toward the back door. It was locked from the inside. She checked her security app on her phone. No sensors had been triggered. No cameras had captured any movement. She was alone in the house. She told herself she must have done it in her sleep. Maybe she was sleepwalking due to the stress. She went back upstairs, locked her bedroom door again, and sat on the edge of the bed, too terrified to close her eyes. About 20 minutes passed. The silence of the house was absolute. And then Maya heard it, coming from right outside her bedroom door. The slow, rhythmic scraping noise. It was moving closer. Maya grabbed her phone and dialed 911. But as the line started to ring, her phone screen suddenly flickered and turned bright, pulsating yellow. The call disconnected. The scraping noise stopped right outside her door. Maya stared at the bottom of the door, where a sliver of light from the hallway usually showed. That sliver of light was now blocked by two dark, thin shadows. Someone was standing right there. And then the doorknob began to turn. Slowly, methodically. Maya watched in horror as the lock she had just engaged clicked open by itself. The door creaked open just a few inches. A thick, black fluid began to ooze from the hinges, dripping onto the floor with a wet, slapping sound. Maya scrambled to the corner of her bed, screaming for help. The door swung wide. Standing in the doorway was the man from her dream. The parchment skin, the hollow pits for eyes, the rusted knife. He stepped into the room, and as he did, the blue moonlight vanished, replaced by that sickly yellow glow. He leaned forward, the black fluid leaking from his eye sockets, and he whispered the same word: found. Maya threw her lamp at him, but it passed through his body as if he were made of smoke. He lunged at her, the rusted knife raised high. Maya squeezed her eyes shut and felt a sharp, searing pain in her shoulder. She screamed one last time, and then total darkness. Maya woke up again. She was back in her bed. The sun was shining through the windows. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. She was gasping for air. She immediately reached for her shoulder. There was no pain. There was no blood. Her nightshirt was dry. She looked at her bedroom door. It was locked. She felt a massive wave of relief. It had been a false awakening, a dream within a dream. She got out of bed, feeling a bit shaky but immensely grateful. She went downstairs to the kitchen, determined to put the whole ordeal behind her. She walked to the marble island to start the coffee. She stopped. The 3 jagged lines were there. They were carved deep into the marble. Maya backed away, her hands shaking. She looked at her phone. The screen was normal, but when she checked her call logs, there was a call to 911 at 2:22 that lasted 0 seconds. She ran to the front door, wanting to get out of the house. As she reached for the deadbolt, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. She stopped. She slowly pulled the collar of her nightshirt down, exposing her right shoulder. There, etched into her skin in dark, bruised lines, was the word found. The nightmare hadn't ended when she woke up. The nightmare had simply waited for her to be fully conscious so she could experience the terror of knowing it was real. Maya Vance moved out of that house that same day. She never went back, not even for her furniture. She tells people she moved because of the commute, but the truth is, she is terrified of falling asleep in any room with a marble counter, because she knows that somewhere that man is still carving, and he knows exactly where she is. And that, my friends, is why this story of a dream that crossed the border into reality is truly strange, dark, and mysterious. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time, stay safe out there.